Welcome back to another episode of Silent Pals Go to the Movies. This is another Throwback Thursday review. I'm here with my friend Touly. Say hi, Touly.
Hi, guys.
And today we're going to be talking about The Silence of the Lambs. And just a fair warning, there's going to be spoilers up ahead, so you've been warned. A young FBI cadet must receive the help of an incarcerated, manipulative cannibal killer to help catch another serial killer, a madman who skins his victims alive. So let's start off by going down the cast. We have Anthony Hopkins as Hannibal Lecter, Jodie Foster as Clarice Starling, Scott Glenn as Jack Crawford, Anthony Held as Dr. Frederick Chilton, Brooke Smith as Catherine Martin, and we have Ted Levine as James Gum or Buffalo Bill. So starting off my review, I'm going to go with my pros. When I saw it the first time, I was really young and it kind of spooked the hell out of me. Mind you that I saw it on a VHS when my cousins rented it. So we saw the movie and I was coming in and they would say that this was a kind of a scary movie, but it wasn't a horror movie per se. It was a thriller, which back in the day, I didn't know. And Hannibal Lecter just gave me the jibbies, especially his scenes where he's all talking monotone and just directly into the camera, which is a thing I'm going to talk about, that when any character talks to Starling or Jodie Foster in the movie, they talk directly into the cameras. But when it's from her point of view talking to someone else, she most of the time doesn't really look into it unless she's actually directing herself to Anthony Hopkins in some scenes. She's actually looking slightly off to the camera, and this is done so we can identify with her subconsciously, so we kind of invest ourselves in her or feel that we're watching things from her point of view, which kind of interested me after I rewatched it, when I was much older and I was in college. I got into this movie and I was like, wow, this is pretty good. I mean, like they're really making us get invested with her indirectly. So subconsciously you invest yourself into her. And the moment that Sir Anthony Hopkins improvised that speech about her southern accent, which gave me a genuine goosebump feeling, it actually scared the hell of Jodie Foster on set and got a genuine reaction from her. And she said that she was really scared of Anthony Hopkins when he said that, but later she actually said thank you because he made her deliver a good reaction. So he got a good reaction out of her and she thanked him for it. As for the character James Gum, played by Ted Levine, this serial killer was actually combined from 3 other serial killers. And the 3 serial killers that he was modeled after was Ed Gein, who skinned his victims, and Ted Bundy, who actually used his arm cast to lure his victims into his van. And then the last person was Gary Heineck, who kept his victims, who were primarily women, in his basement inside a pit. And one of the things that really interested me was that every time people have referenced this movie, they kind of misquote some of the lines. For example, the line that's really famous, Hannibal Lecter greets Clarice by saying, "Good evening, Clarice." And some people has misquoted this movie by saying, "Hello, Clarice." But just to let you know, the correct one is, "Good evening, Clarice." What I really liked about this movie is the whole development of the character. She starts as a cadet, and then by the hands of a madman, she gets molded to become a good weapon to find these people. Kind of like, is Hannibal Lecter really a bad guy? Yes, he is, because he kills people, but he's also helping. How do you see this character? Is he all good or is he all bad? Can he be a little bit of both? Has society made him crazy? Has society created him as a monster? Or is that how they perceive him? Is he only going after the bad guys? Because he does tell Clarice at the end of the movie that don't worry, that he's not going to go after her, that the world is better off with her in it. So in this sense, it's like, what does he really want to do? Because we do see him at the end. He goes to have one of his old friends for dinner, and he leaves out by going after the guy who tortured him when he was imprisoned. Some of the accuracies in this movie I really liked because they actually had people who worked from the FBI to put their input in it. There was a cadet who actually Jodie Foster shadowed for a while, and she got the idea from this cadet for the scene where she goes out after speaking to Lecter. She cries close to her car, and the cadet would say that most of the agents deal with heavy stuff throughout the day in their career, that sometimes they do want to vent. Most of these things they put in here are basically factual, and some of them might be just Hollywood inspired, but some of the things, if you look them up, do make sense from a point of view of a person who works in this field of work. So moving on to my cons, I only have one con. That is when Hannibal Lecter escapes in the ambulance. In that scene, he actually kills two of the cops that are monitoring him in the cell. One of my things is, before he gets transferred, he steals a pen. If he's wrapped in the leather belts and has a full face mask on, how does he get that pen that's literally probably like 3 feet away from him? I mean, he can't move an inch. So that's one of the cons. Second thing is, leads to this same thing. When he's in the cell and he escapes, they take him in the ambulance and they basically think he's an injured officer, but they don't really take time to see if his face is real, but they instinctively put a mask over it with oxygen. I'm like, if you're there to lend help for someone, don't you need to clear the airway first? Technically, this is first aid. Yeah, you would actually touch the face to see like if he's hurt, or you need to open his mouth. There needs to be a clear way for him to breathe. And that, when doing that, you would find out that he has just put a piece of skin over his face, like a mask. But they don't do that. And then when he's in the ambulance, he does take off the oxygen mask and then takes off the skin, and that's when we see that he makes his great escape. And then my other con is that after that, how in hell does he get money or a passport to travel if he was just in jail? It's not that he has some money stored away. Maybe he does, but we never see that, and we just find him just being in another tropical island somewhere. So that does it, and I turn it over to Touly to see how he saw this movie.
Similar to a lot of these films that we're doing for Throwback Thursdays, this film, The Silence of the Lambs, was one of those movies where I didn't see when it came out back in 91. So my first encounter of this movie came in cultural references, and as Sal has pointed out, has made its mark in other aspects of the entertainment business, whether in other movies, other TV shows. I've encountered bits and pieces of this film in these other forms in relationship to a lot of the famous lines that have been taken from this film. And of course, Sal mentioned one of those famous lines being, "Good evening, Clarice." And I do want to elaborate a little bit on the confusion of that line. And I could sort of understand why maybe people, such as myself too, I'll put myself in there by misquoting the line, because probably it was due to seeing another entertainment form. Maybe these other shows or whatever didn't quite say it word for word as well, but it was more in the manner of this greeting. So even if I didn't say "Good evening, Clarice," it's more in the manner that I'm saying it. And if I were to switch it up by saying "Hello, Clarice," or "Good morning, Clarice," you still sort of get the feel. So I could sort of understand why some people might have misquoted this very famous line from the movie, because maybe they first was introduced to this line in a different form, in different wording, but it was more, again, the manner that people are delivering this line. But at the same time, I totally put myself in the same boat, because I too have misquoted this line, and that's my personal reason for not having quoted it correctly. But I understand both sides here. But in terms of the movie, in terms of like a thriller film, one of my favorite thriller films of all time, Anthony Hopkins' performance here as Hannibal Lecter, I feel like these are the sort of roles that it's not just necessarily what he's known for, but I feel like it's the sort of roles that fits him. If that makes any sense. It's like it matches his sort of acting style. He tends to play these sort of characters very well, where he manipulate other characters, other people, at the same time have this underlying motivation in doing so. Not just to get into their heads, not just to understand where they're coming from, but this personal gain that he wants out of this as well. And in this case, in The Silence of the Lambs, I saw it, and I'm pretty sure a lot of people else saw it this way too. It was his way of him getting out of his current situation where he was being held captive at, of wanting to be free, quote unquote, again, to see those trees that he's been long wanting to see because he's been held captive for like 8 or so years. I think Anthony Hopkins does a really good job at playing these sort of roles, and it just like fits him. So this is one of his earliest films, and I totally feel like it was a great way for me to get introduced to Anthony Hopkins when I eventually got to watching The Silence of the Lambs film. And then Jodie Foster, I will give her kudos as well. In terms of female protagonists in films, I can't really think of a lot of characters from the top of my head that I would say, you know what, she was one of my favorite female protagonists, if not character, from like a movie. There's only a handful, and she's definitely in there. And it's also attributed to, of course, Jodie Foster's performance, but at the same time, it's the journey that we go on with Clarice, from Hannibal Lecter getting into her head, and we knowing more about Clarice's past in relationship to her father, how she dealt with it, how she dealt with her waking up to crying lambs and how that has haunted her and how she's trying to get rid of those nightmares, according to Hannibal Lecter, by getting to this guy who's been kidnapping and killing women. So the fact that she's also a FBI trainee, like she's still working her way up the rank, it makes her character very vulnerable still, despite being in a position of power, to so to speak. To see her be in a state of trying to be in control of the situation, but yet still see a character who's vulnerable to being exploited by, a character like Anthony Hopkins, Hannibal Lecter. It feels very raw and believable. I, for one, really loved the journey that I went on when we saw it from Clarice's side. I thought the pacing was good. So I did think that the film started off slow, but not in that way where I thought that it was bad or dragging, but it was just a means to setting up what was to come later in the film, but definitely not a con. I would say the single biggest con that I would have with the film, and it does have to do with what Sal mentioned earlier in the scene where Hannibal Lecter escaped. So Sal mentioned the nuances where it didn't quite make sense for him in terms of why they didn't check his face or whatever, given that he was able to escape with a skin mask. My thing about this whole ordeal was after the ambulance scene, there wasn't enough urgency shown for me to believe that this guy was a dangerous person. So the movie made me to believe that this Hannibal Lecter guy was dangerous. And I felt like he was more dangerous than the Jane Gum who was going about kidnapping and killing females in the film. However, after this ambulance scene, and assuming that he killed everybody on that vehicle and then escaped, there was not enough shown after the fact to make me believe that there was any urgency for him being captured. I don't mind so much that he escaped, but more on the fact that there wasn't enough effort shown to go after this guy. The focus then just shifted over to Jane Gum. We see what happened, and we get a great scene between Clarice and him in the basement wherein the lights went out. But then right after that scene, the movie just shifts to how many weeks or months later where Clarice, finally gets recognized as being an FBI agent. And then you get the call from Hannibal Lecter. So in between that time, I wanted to see something to kind of indicate to me that, yes, Hannibal Lecter is still out there. We weren't able to capture him, but there was some effort that went into it because we recognized this guy as being dangerous. And again, the film led me to believe that this guy is dangerous. So why wouldn't they show me anything after his successful escape, particularly with Clarice, because Clarice, in a way, helped him escape, despite it not being her intention at all. But I wanted to see some sort of guilt from her to make me realize that, I might have messed up here, despite my well-intention of getting Jane Gum, but I maybe helped a more dangerous individual escape. To me, that was my biggest con of the film. I just wanted to see a little something there to make me feel that Hannibal Lecter was as dangerous as a person that they led me to believe from the start of the film. But overall, I thought the film did a great job at getting us into the mindset of our main protagonist, Clarice, into our main villain's head, Hannibal Lecter, and how they went about solving this crime of this guy by the name of Jane Gum. There were very few moments where I wasn't invested into the film. Despite this film just being a thriller film, I do appreciate how you do get that horror-like of aspect into it. Normally in these horror films, the evil, as I would refer to it, they normally come out on top. For me, a lot of times when I see that happen, it leaves me with an unsatisfying taste because it makes me feel like there was nothing the protagonist or the character who's playing the innocent person, there was nothing that they could have done to defend themselves from this evil entity. Whereas in this film, despite the villain winning at the end because he escaped, in a way, you kind of appreciated that he was able to escape because of the effort that he put himself into doing so. Like I said, the way he manipulated Jodie Foster's character, Clarice, and how he worked the system, given the circumstance of Jane Gum, and using his situation to his own leverage. I tend to gravitate more to these sort of endings, despite a villain coming out on top, because yes, the villain might go on and do some bad stuff. And as Hannibal Lecter said in the movie, he was going to go out and have an old friend for dinner. It has this sense of dark comedy into it, and I could sort of appreciate that versus in a straight up horror film where evil just comes out on top and there's nothing you could do about it. I do appreciate how they handled the ending here. Like many other films that I've talked about here on Sal's podcast, this is definitely one of those films where if you haven't seen it, but you have some knowledge of the references of this film, like I said, those famous lines that maybe you have said to friends or whomever, but you didn't know where it came from. Well, I'm pretty sure that this is one of those films that you unknowingly have been quoting, and I would highly recommend you go and watch this film, not just for the quotes, but the film overall was a very entertaining and psychological watch as well.
In the last part where you said that you think that Hannibal Lecter is more of a danger to society than the actual Buffalo Bill or James Gumb, I want to say that he's actually still stringing, or I would like to believe that he's still stringing Starling along at the end. Because he did say after the line that you said that he's having an old friend for dinner, he's telling this to Clarice to basically push her buttons. So he tells her, I have no plans to call on you, Clarice. The world's more interesting with you in it, saying like, hey, look, I don't mean for you. I'm not going to go after you, so you shouldn't go after me. Extend me the same courtesy. But Clarice says, no, I can't do that. You know that. So he's basically like, he understands what she's going to do. He led her to capture Buffalo Bill, but in doing so, like you said, she let Lecter out. So now it's up to Clarice to go after Lecter. And that's how I see this movie played out. And it did come out that there's other prequels and sequels that came after this. But for me, that little chat, so it's this little internal battle they're having. So that's how I saw that. I agree with what you said, that the movie started slow, but like you said, it's not a bad slow. You know, you're getting introduced to the characters. You're getting introduced to a bunch of things. As she's walking into the office, you start noticing the pictures and the chalkboard where it says skin, you know, victim, this and that, and little clippings from the killings. That's building you up to basically say, hey, you who came out of nowhere, it's the same thing as Clarice, still a cadet, comes into this whole thing. They throw her into going directly to Lecter and talking to him. It's basically us as the audience. We're playing the Clarice's role and we jump in, and then after that it's like boom, 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 boom. It gets into the psychological thriller. We get to talk deeper about Hannibal Lecter and Clarice, and we learned about them, and then we learned about Buffalo Bill. You said Buffalo Bill is a secondary character. I agree with you on that. I see this movie mostly surrounding Clarice and Hannibal Lecter. So another thing I'm going to say is that this movie had a bunch of quotes, and we have the famous line that a lot of people love to hear when he says, a census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti. So those lines, if you hear them anywhere, like, it's infamous for being reminiscent of the character Hannibal Lecter. So I guess with that, I'm gonna throw it to Touly and see what his final grade of the movie is.
Great thriller film. Easily one of my favorites in terms of that category. So yeah, I'm gonna give this film a 8.5 out of 10. Definitely go watch it if you haven't seen it, and I'm pretty sure you guys will enjoy it.
I totally agree with you. I'm also going to give it an 8.5 out of 10. And like Buffalo Bill said, it rubs the lotion on his skin or else it gets the hose again. This movie is one of my favorite movies that I can see anytime or just put in the background or show to somebody who has not seen it and enjoy their honest reaction to it. So that does it for this review of The Silence of the Lambs. Please join us next time when we review The Hills Have Eyes from 1977, the original.
Air Force been through here twice. You folks have to go rob a goddamn Air Force PX for God's sakes?
We're hungry. No one comes through back there anymore.
What'd you get?
Whiskey and radios. I ain't got nothing to eat.
Please like, comment, and subscribe. You can find our social media links down below. And like always, keep watching movies. Keep watching movies. Keep watching movies.